to our main story now. Finance Minister Tito Mboweni will today deliver his supplementary budget speech. Mboweni is expected to focus on the cost of government borrowing and changes seen since April. South Africa's is already struggling. The economy has worsened due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Experts forecast that it will shrink by 7%. Mboweni will hold a press conference after his speech. Let's speak now to the PricewaterhouseCoopers chief economist, Lulu Krugel, who joins me via Skype. Lulu, good morning to you, and thank you for your time. South Africa's jobs issue or crisis, perhaps is the right way to describe it, has always been an issue pre-COVID-19, coupled with poor economic growth. What we're seeing now is not even factoring in the issue of the pandemic, is it?
Yeah, clearly, unfortunately, the job numbers that was released yesterday, with unemployment for the first time breaching through the 30% mark, that was recorded mid-March, so it covers the first quarter of this year. And unfortunately, that was even before COVID-19 hit and before we saw the lockdown in the economy. So we should expect the situation would probably get worse when we get numbers about the second quarter. Yeah,
the devastation is probably going to be astronomical. Lulu, I want to talk to you about the Treasury's consultative document, those who claim to have seen it as it was presented to NADLEC last week. They're saying that the finance minister and his team expect the GDP to return to pre-COVID-19 levels only in 2024. Is that what you expect him to say today?
Yeah, unfortunately, I must say our own scenarios that we calculated in terms of GDP impact. So it shows an impact or a contraction this year of around 8%, and then the economy slowly starts to recover. But yes, only by 2024, in a good scenario, and if things get even worse, it could take up to 5 years before we are back where we were before COVID-19, which, as you earlier said, wasn't a good position to be in already. The economy was already in a recession. We already had high unemployment rates. We already had debt levels that were unsustainably high. So unfortunately, this COVID-19 and everything that's come with it has just exacerbated this problem. And I think the minister and his team must have worked extraordinarily hard the last couple of weeks to try and get something on the table this afternoon.
One economist remarking this week that Mboweni is going to have to, quote-unquote, scare Parliament in order to demonstrate just how dire our economic situation is. Do you expect, though, that the public sector unions are going to be sympathetic to that message or even appreciate that messaging?
Unfortunately, if history is anything to go by, the answer is no. And the fact of the matter is, scare Parliament, but the reality is if we don't do something, we're going to sit with debt to GDP numbers in excess of 100% within a couple of years, 3 years maybe. We will already breach the 80% mark this afternoon, I think. And we know that the IMF and everybody else expect countries like South Africa to have a debt to GDP number of around 55%. And combined with that, the deficit will probably go towards the 10 to 12% of GDP, the budget deficit. So those are absolutely unsustainable numbers, and something's got to give. And we cannot in any way continue to do things in the same way and expect that to change. Private sector, and I'm not saying that, it's difficult to say in the current situation. Obviously, we need to protect jobs, etc. But if you look at private sector, there's been a lot of initiatives, people cutting salaries, working shorter periods of time, etc. Companies trying to keep people in positions, but everybody's feeling the pain. And I think a lot of the public, general public, looks at what is happening in government and saying that, there should be some giving from there as well. And they're not seeing it at the moment.
Lulu, another important area of focus is going to have to be tax collection. The President telling Parliament last week during his Q&A session there that the expectation is that 300 billion rand will be lost in terms of revenue collection, and you couple that with the 1 billion rand that is reported to be borrowed by government per day in order to meet its daily commitments. How sustainable is the pace at which government is borrowing?
The point is that it is not in the current situation. And what you're saying, rightfully, I think the biggest problem this year would be the massive loss in tax revenue that we'll see. And that 300 billion is unfortunately, in my opinion, the correct number. It could be even more if the shock to the economy is more, but fingers crossed that it's not. So the unfortunate thing is that with that would be the biggest concern, that massive shortfall in tax, and there's no way to fill that hole except through borrowing through the rest of the year. So if we don't change expenditure, if we don't really have a critical lens around how do we fund SOEs, do we provide extra money to SAA, the overall government employee bill, which is almost between 30 and 40% of overall government cost. If we don't look at those things critically, we're not going to turn the situation around. And I think that's what the Minister of Finance would like to show Parliament this afternoon, is that we can turn it around. It's not impossible, but then we have to change the way in which we do things. First of all, the immediate reaction would have to be to look at expenditure, but then over the next couple of months and years, a very, very driven focus to grow the economy, because that's the only way to grow taxes. And to be quite honest, if you look at employment and GDP, those two, historically, for every 1% that GDP has grown, jobs have grown by 0.9%. So a very close relationship between those two. And it's really important that we get the economy growing to get jobs going as well.
Yeah, very, very key indeed, with the Finance Minister warning of a sovereign debt crisis by 2024.